So, the main character introduces himself and begins his story. My name is Tu-yi, and as a completely sane person, I want to tell you that time travel is a real nightmare. This guy had previously been fascinated by the time travel debate on internet forums, even writing a sarcastic response to a user who asked which dynasty someone would like to join. Tu-yi replied to him and wrote that in ancient times there were many more wars, and in the past, death on the doorstep could come without any problems. It is foolish and naive to expect that you will immediately become an emperor with 1,000 concubines. So, Tu-yi succumbed to the influence of karma and was able to experience its beauty firsthand, finding himself in a parallel world as an emperor. More accurately, the beginning was unfortunate. Tu-yi found himself at the funeral of the previous emperor, immersed in a gloomy atmosphere of sadness and mourning, before his fate took an unexpected turn. Therefore, the first thing Tu-yi saw when he found himself in the huge hall was nothing other than the majestic coffin containing the emperor's body, surrounded by candles and flowers, symbolizing the deep sorrow of the court and the people. Right there, not far away, the ministers were crowded together. From their well-fed and insolent faces, it was clear that they had long since gotten out of control, and these ministers dared to express their opinion directly to Tu-ye's face that he was the most useless descendant of the emperor who was destined to inherit the throne. And nothing worked out with the concubines either. As Tu-yi said, there was complete chaos there. The girls were literally forced to please the young emperor. Of course, they were going to turn him into an obedient puppet, so that, having formally become emperor, he would hand over power to those who stood behind the scenes, manipulating him to achieve their own goals. Tu-yi categorically disapproved of such thoughts and plans. He declared that even if he became a tyrant and destroyed this country, he would not allow himself to be ruled. Tu-yi imagined himself as a powerful emperor, wondering which punishment would be better for his enemies, being burned at the stake or torn to pieces by horses. He also indulged in dreams of how he would endlessly enjoy a luxurious life, drowning in debauchery among seductive concubines, surrounded by their beauty and tenderness, immersed in an endless whirlwind of pleasure. How wonderful it is to be an emperor and allow yourself everything you dream of. Enjoy the most exquisite pleasures, participate in subtle court intrigues, and weave complex conspiracies against enemies. Keep the entire court on edge and feel your limitless power and freedom. Tu-yi sharply ordered them to stop spreading all sorts of nonsense about him, claiming that these rumors were just vile fabrications. And the minister, narrowing his eyes, suspiciously asked if Tu-yi had been a wolf in sheep's clothing all this time, hiding his true nature under a mask. "This emperor is simply incredible," exclaimed the courtiers and ministers when discussing Tu-yi, but they were amazed by his originality, charisma, and unexpected cunning that he displayed. Tu-yi preferred not to listen to advice and instructions, considering traditional views outdated. He saw himself as a new, progressive, and unusual emperor, challenging ancient norms. Self-confident and bold, he sought to establish his own rules of the game. Tu-yi had firmly decided that even if he lost, he would still ultimately prevail in achieving his goals. A plan to turn failure to his advantage was already maturing in his mind. He was confident that, despite all the obstacles and intrigues, his determination and foresight would allow him to achieve final victory and write his name in history as a great and powerful emperor. So, let's transport ourselves to the majestic imperial palace of the Song Empire, located in another parallel dimension. Here, among luxurious buildings with intricate roofs, lies a manicured garden where a variety of greenery blooms lushly, filling the air with the sense of exotic plants and flowers. But despite this lush beauty, an extraordinary emptiness and silence reigns all around. But inside the palace, there was a commotion. A minister announced the death of the previous Emperor Guanjuan, and that the throne had passed to his fourth son Tu-yi, who, despite being rude and uneducated, had received his father's blessing, or perhaps conspiratorial ministers had brought him to the throne. Tu-yi, hearing this, couldn't understand what was happening, because he had just been thrown into this parallel reality, and he immediately found himself at the emperor's funeral, and the whirlwind of events literally swallowed him up. What kind of emperor is Tu? The boy thought and pondered. He was literally taken aback. It's not every day you get thrown into parallel worlds, and into the imperial palace, no less. Suddenly, a realization dawned on him, and he clutched his head in horror. Tu finally realized where he had ended up and who he had become in this parallel reality, understanding the complexity and danger of his new situation. But just recently, Tu was just a simple guy living in a modern world, spending time watching videos, chatting on social networks, and discussing on forums. Suddenly, Tu remembered wandering around the forum again, and his attention was drawn to the question of which of the historical dynasties of the past would like to join and why. Tu also remembered his not entirely polite answer, and to be completely frank, completely rude, he remembered how rudely and mockingly he ridiculed his interlocutor, how he tried to prove to him that our time was the most appropriate. Could this really be karma? A terrifying thought occurred to Tu. He began to defend himself, saying he hadn't meant anything like that. It was just a stupid joke, and then immediately lamented the fact that he found himself in an unknown place at an unknown time. Tu discovered that his wrist was adorned with a heavy gold bracelet, which turned out to be the Imperial Dynasty alert system, or simply the Speedic, and the same Speedic began to search for information about the country by location. Tu couldn't stand the talking bracelet any longer, became furious, screamed, and began to suspect that this was all one big joke, and this was one of the elements of that joke. Speedic continued to broadcast that the system was created according to his wishes, and he would be able to return home if he achieved the collapse of this dynasty. And he, Speedic, would help him in any way possible. At this point, the girl watched Tu closely, wondering why he had suddenly frozen in stupor. At that moment, he was contemplating the folly of his return home, how it had led to the destruction of the dynasty. He had never experienced anything like this before. The girl also thought about what had happened to Tu. Before, he always smiled stupidly when looking at her, but now, obviously, something was wrong with him. Tu noticed the girl's gaze and asked the speedster to compile a report on the stranger. He provided him with a whole dossier, and it turned out that the girl's name was Zhao Shu, the adopted daughter of Emperor Zhao, who was introduced to Emperor Tu as a concubine, and with her help, Zhao designed to monitor and control Tu. Suddenly, right before Tu's eyes, a tablet with Zhao Shu's data appeared on the screen. Speedic helpfully displayed all her stats, such as influence, cunning, and strength, and Tu simply froze in amazement. It was like a game, and Speedic confirmed that the system provides the owner with statistics on all people nearby. Zhao Shu probably mistook the boy's attentive gaze at the numbers for an interested look. She thought she saw a spark of admiration or surprise flash in Tu's eyes. Tu gazed into Zhao Shu's blue eyes and wondered if this beauty had truly been sent to spy on him. Zhao Shu, for her part, was worried that Tu had figured out her plans. One of the ministers noticed Tu's absent-minded appearance. He turned to the young emperor and asked what thoughts were troubling him, what was troubling his majesty. Instead of answering, Tu turned to the system and asked it to show him data. Tu guessed that these were the very conspirators whose secret machinations could influence the future of the empire. The system immediately produced a dossier implicating Li Tianyuan, the first prime minister of the Song dynasty and Zhao Zhu's half-brother. Li considered Tu his mindless puppet and therefore installed him on the imperial throne. Zhua, the second prime minister, held similar views and opinions to Li Tianyuan, but Zhao's abilities and accomplishments surpassed those of the first minister. While Tu was amazed by the cunning and influence of these gentlemen, Zhao Shu looked at him and wondered why His Majesty had such a distant and cold look. This had never happened before, and it frightened and excited the girl at the same time. Zhao returned to Li Tianyuan and asked him if he thought the young emperor was afraid that the throne he had been enthroned on would begin to totter under his feet. Tu replied that he wasn't afraid at all, but rather that he prayed for the throne to fall under his rule, and with it the entire country. Zhao Shu listened attentively to his every word, wondering how the emperor managed to remain so calm, wondering if he really cared about the fate of the country. Zhao was said that the late emperor had expressed his wish to see Prince Tu Su, who was currently abroad on a military campaign, take his place. So, Tu Yi thought the old man wanted Tu Su to be the heir, but he's currently absent from the capital because he's commanding the army. At that moment, Zhao was solemnly declared that they had defied Tu Su's will and supported Tu Yi as heir to the throne. Now Tu Yi understood why the two ministers were so brazen and self-assured. They were in the capital, not fighting in a foreign country. Meanwhile, Zhao mockingly patted the lid of the imperial coffin and said that the deceased was unlikely to jump out and start dealing with them. But he wasn't so sure about Tu Su. Zhao continued his speech. The rumors of the emperor's death have not yet spread. Zhao approached Tu Yi and handed him the seal, saying that this jade seal was a symbol of power, and it was now in Tu Yi's hands. The minister then suggested that Tu Yi take the first step and issue a decree. With a mischievous smile, Zhao declared, "May Tu Su rest in peace, just like the former emperor." This grin of his did not bode well. After listening to Zhao's words, Tu Yi thought that if he followed their plan and ordered Tu Su's death, the throne would definitely go to him. But in this way, he would not be able to destroy the country and therefore return home. This guy literally saw how two prime ministers dreamed of making him their puppet, how to take over the world in the hands of Tu Yi through intrigue and conspiracies. However, Tu Yi was not concerned with the ministers and their court intrigues. He was much more concerned with his own fate. He felt that he no longer belonged to himself and desperately wanted to return to his former ordinary life. He thought deeply and became sad. Would he really have to live in this role, in this hostile time, and engage in unnecessary and uninteresting activities? There had to be some way out. Zhao continued to stand there all this time, holding the jade seal in his hands and pretending to smile at Tu Yi, clearly expecting the emperor to take some action. Tu Yi did not disappoint his expectations. He abruptly and roughly snatched the seal from the prime minister's hands and froze, his hand outstretched, his gaze frozen. A few moments passed before Minister Zhao recovered from his shock and shouted, "Emperor, Tu Yi, what are you doing?" Zhao tried to persuade Tu Yi to calm down, but at the time, Tu Yi thought that if he were killed, the dynasty would collapse and he would be able to return home. Tu Yi thought this was an excellent plan. Raising his hand with the seal clenched in it, so that Zhao could not reach it, Tu Yi shouted that he was now the emperor, and from now on it was up to him to decide who should live and who should die. Behind the trapped Tu Yi and Zhao Shu was watching, covering her mouth in surprise, admiring how Tu Yi dared to openly confront her father. She was impressed by his strength. Zhao Shu watched in admiration as Tu Yi, now completely emboldened, jabbed Minister Zhao in the face. She couldn't help but notice the threatening expression on his face and the young emperor's bold stance when he asked if anyone objected to his decision. The girl watched Tu Yi's behavior with admiration. In her opinion, this was how a real man should behave, but why were his current habits so different from his previous behavior? Probably, Zhao Shu concluded, all this time, even before he had to pretend and act, how could she, a first-class actress, not recognize it before? And so, as Zhao Shu guessed, after receiving the imperial symbol, the jade seal, Tu Yi dropped his mask and revealed his true identity. However, Zhao Shu's stepfather was displeased, downright furious. The prime minister clenched his fist in anger and shouted threateningly that it seemed that the young emperor had become arrogant after taking the throne, and since Zhao had been able to place him on the throne, he would overthrow him in the same way. Tu Yi, determined to finally irritate the minister, held the seal up to his face, stuck out his tongue, and licked it several times, daring Zhao Shu to attack him. The prime minister was about to strangle the insolent man, and Zhao Shu rushed to Tu Yi's defense. First Prime Minister Li Tianyuan decided to intervene in the fight and called for everyone to calm down, emphasizing the need to maintain order and peace in the hall. Tu Yi noticed that this Li Tianyuan was maintaining a calm and composed expression, but it didn't matter. He would now give them a performance that they would remember for years to come. Tianyuan began his speech when suddenly Tu Yi stretched out his hand right in front of his nose and, as if by mistake, removed the jade seal from his hands. With a loud thud, the seal crashed to the floor and shattered into pieces. The ministers stared in amazement at the seal's fragments, while Zhaojua's eyes widened and he broke out in a cold sweat of terror. With a completely innocent look, Tu Yi shrugged his shoulders and spread his arms out to the sides, saying that the seal accidentally slipped out of his hands. What should I do? I'm so clumsy. The imperial seal is a symbol of the power and authority of the ruling dynasty. Only the emperor has the sacred right to seal his decrees with it. It gives the right to command vassals and is the key to world conquest, which has always been the object of desire and ambition of powerful rulers and emperors. The head of the Qi dynasty, Guanjuan, was called emperor, making it clear his reign would last for centuries. And Tu Yi thought, had just broken that seal. If this was considered treason, even Li Tianyuan shouldn't have tolerated such a provocation. Tu Yi, with anticipation and hope in his eyes, looked at Li Tianyuan as if telling him, "Go ahead, kill me if you dare, and put an end to this damn dynasty." It seemed like Qiao Jiu was ready to hurl every curse he knew, but he simply couldn't find the right words, only stuttering and muttering in rage. "Oh, yes, I'll show you now." And then Li Tianyuan intervened again, trying to calm his nervous colleague, and said that His Majesty the Emperor was just joking because he owned not only this seal, but the entire world. Tu Yi didn't understand why there was so much fuss and concern surrounding this seal. Li Tianyuan reminded him that it was late, time for His Majesty to rest, and that urgent matters could be discussed in the morning. After much discussion and weighing all the arguments, the ministers unanimously concluded that there was some truth in Li Tianyuan's words and that there was no need to feel anxious and nervous before going to bed. Li Tianyuan turned and headed for the door, but Tu Ye's loud shout made the minister turn around. The young man asked, "Is everyone equal before the law in this country? Shouldn't he be sentenced to death for breaking the seal?" However, no one was in a hurry to execute Tu Yi, even though the two prime ministers did not have the friendliest plans for the young emperor. As soon as he left, they began to discuss the time to get rid of him. The idea of getting rid of him was Qiao Jiu's, and Li Tianyuan tried to find out if the prime minister understood the consequences. Qiao Jiu responded by being outraged that Li Tianyuan had respectfully addressed the boy as "Your Majesty." The minister asked if his colleague understood what would happen if, while Tu Su was absent from the capital, the young Emperor Tu Yi died under mysterious circumstances. Tianyuan continued, "Be the first to be suspected in this matter, and in general," Li Tianyuan concluded, "the seal has been removed, which means that we can no longer put pressure on Tu Su. Therefore, according to Li Tianyuan, eliminating Tu Yi is currently inadvisable, as we supported him as the future heir to the throne." At this point, Qiao Jiu asked whether Tu Yi had intentionally broken the seal to save his brother from death, and the minister nodded affirmatively. Initially, Tu Su, the minister explained, was an obstacle in Tu Ye's path to the throne, but now he is the legitimate ruler, so we will have to reconsider our position, Li Tianyuan concluded. The minister stated that on other continents, wars between states continued, while here in the north, the Qi dynasty was able to unite these forces under its leadership. Tu Su enjoys the support of a strong army, and if he were in the capital now, he would have to worry about his position, as it would be impossible to put pressure on Tu Yi. But if he went too far, he would simply let his brother's troops into the city, and we ministers would be defeated. Li Tianyuan continued to develop his idea, and, according to him, Tu Yi could even use the force triangle diagram to strengthen their position and control over the empire. Zhaozhuo looked at his colleague doubtfully and asked if he was overreacting. It was unlikely that this young man possessed such strategic planning skills. In response, Li Tianyuan reminded Zhaozhuo of the young man's words about equality before the law and asked his colleague if he knew whose words those were, as those words belonged to the great Wei Qianlu, the prime minister of the Qi dynasty. Li Tianyuan continued his historical excursion and said that at that time, Minister Wei was the emperor's favorite, wielded enormous influence, and occupied the highest position in the country. Tianyuan recalled, he lost the emperor's trust and was sentenced to be quartered as punishment for treason. Zhao Zhuo frowned and muttered that he wasn't Wei Qianlu and wouldn't bow to a youth who relied solely on Tu Su's military might. Furthermore, the minister added, the youth had never given any specific orders, so they could simply send assassins to Tu Su and pin the blame on Tu Yi. The plan struck Zhao Zhuo as both cunning and simple. Li Tianyuan was deep in thought, his face expressionless, and after a pause, he said that Tu Yi was originally chosen out of all the emperor's many descendants because he was the easiest to control, but it seems something had gone wrong. Tianyuan's impartial expression made it impossible to guess what he was thinking. He was only quietly laughing at his own thoughts, suppressing his inner turmoil and maintaining an outward calm in the face of an unpredictable situation. Then a sly grin appeared on his face, which did not bode well, and the minister began to think about what outstanding descendants the late emperor had. All this time, while intrigues were being woven and events of past years were being retold, the young emperor slept peacefully in his bed, not even suspecting what fate and what trials it had in store for him. However, the new day did not bring Tu Yi anything pleasant or interesting. He was tormented by idleness and boredom. No games could interest him. The food seemed disgusting, and even an attempt to read the manuscripts was unsuccessful. The guy simply got confused by the names on the very first pages. He was in a terrible rage and cursed this era, this country and dynasty. This guy had gone crazy without a cell phone and a computer and was afraid of dying here without being able to return home. It was during one of those moments of despair that Tu Ye's dark thoughts were interrupted. There was a knock on the door of his imperial chambers. The young man was angry and didn't want to see anyone, but it turned out to be Zhao Shu. Confused, flushed, and stammering, the girl said that she needed His Majesty's help in the bedroom, and her whole appearance indicated that help was needed urgently. Hearing such a request for help, the guy immediately perked up. His imagination was already drawing pleasant and exciting pictures. He was anticipating unforgettable moments alone with himself. The guy immediately turned away from his sad thoughts and hurried to the bedroom. After all, you can't refuse a girl help, especially when it's so urgent and necessary. The boy and girl spent many pleasant minutes in bed, and while they were cuddling and hugging, Tu Yi thought that he had completely lost control of the situation. Tu Yi remembered his mission and intention to return to his time, and to carry out his plan, he was going to use Zhao Shu as the key character. Suddenly, Tu Yi noticed the golden hairpin that adorned Zhao Shu's head, and a plan to use this decoration for his own purposes came to mind. Who would have thought, Tu Yi said with delight about his ingenuity, that such a small thing as a hairpin would become a key for him, the key to returning to his home world. Tu Yi got out of bed, turned his back to Zhao Shu, poured himself a drink, and casually called the girl by name. In the same carefree tone, he asked whether Zhao Shu was really a spy sent to him by Zhao Zhuo. Oh my God, I've been exposed, this can't be. Zhao Shu thought in panic, wrapped in sheets, her heart pounding with fear of being exposed. Zhao Shu feigned innocence, and, in a trembling voice, said she didn't understand what His Majesty was talking about. Tu Yi responded by declaring that he didn't care about her relationship with Zhao Zhuo, and therefore she shouldn't be afraid. Taking a sip from his glass, Tu Yi asked again if Zhao Zhuo had sent him to report all his actions, and then, with a malicious smile, asked how it felt to be so easily exposed. Zhao Shu was frozen in shock and could not utter a word, but Tu Yi continued to speak, remarking that he liked all these court intrigues and games. Otherwise, the imperial life seemed boring to him. Zhao Shu frantically considered various possibilities in her mind, such as whether her stepfather had really sent her to the imperial harem on purpose. And for Tu Yi, it was just a game, and perhaps by talking about this game, he wanted to show that he was tired of her. Tu Yi didn't seem to notice Zhao Shu adding something to his glass, took a sip and chuckled, saying that it was just wine. Apparently this guy wouldn't mind drinking something stronger. Pretending to be very tired, Tu Yi sat down at the table, clasped his head in his hands, and seemed to be snoring, thinking to himself that this was the perfect moment for Zhao Shu to deal with him. She seemed to think much the same, because she was exposed, her secret mission failed, and in the eyes of her stepfather, she lost all value and significance. Zhao Shu had only one way to save her reputation and position, And with these thoughts, she removed the hairpin from her complicated hairstyle, her eyes burning with fire. Tiptoeing silently like a cat, Zhao Shu crept up to Tu Yi, who was sleeping peacefully at the table. He seemed to be sleeping soundly, snoring softly. Tu Yi's slumber was suddenly interrupted by a speed signal indicating the system data update had completed. He looked gloomily at his bracelet and muttered, "What update? I'm about to finish the mission, so get ready to take me home." Spidek explained that for the owner's convenience, a point system was introduced to calculate the stability of the Qing dynasty, taking into account political, military, cultural, and many other factors. Once Tu Yi succeeds in reducing the country's points to 0, the mission will be considered accomplished. Currently, the points total 1,000. So, Tu Yi assumed if he died right now and still had points left, he'd simply die here and never return home. The system confirmed that, given his current importance, he wouldn't take away many points. Tu Yi cursed. He was furious that the system hadn't warned him about this earlier, and in general, it was very insulting to have your life valued so low. And at that very moment, Zhao Shu was already raising the murder weapon over the young emperor. Perhaps, the girl thought, this was another test from His Majesty, but she had no choice. She was completely focused on her deadly mission, about to plunge the hairpin into the emperor's neck, when Tu Yi suddenly jumped up and grabbed the girl by the hand holding the hairpin. Zhao Shu froze in shock. Disappointed and taken aback, the girl thought that His Majesty had outsmarted her again, but Tu Yi himself was extremely relieved that the plan had not worked and he remained alive. With a sharp movement, Zhao Shu pulled her hand out of Tu Yi's grip, and in the heat of the argument, the young man's shirt flew off, and looking at his bare chest, the girl thought that she had been given a second chance. However, luck did not smile on him. With one well-aimed and powerful kick, Tu Yi sent the cunning concubine flying across the room, where she lost her footing and fell flat on her back, the hairpin falling out of her hand. Tu Yi approached the girl and mockingly remarked that she wasn't a warrior at all, and that she'd dared to climb up to him, covered only by a sheet. Now, that was presumptuous. At that moment, tears of irritation and despair streamed down Zhao Shu's cheeks. The young man picked up the hairpin that had fallen from Zhao Shu's hand and said that she was being too impatient, that she had gotten angry over a few words. Real spies don't act like that. With these words, Tu Yi roughly grabbed the girl by the chin and pressed the hairpin to her face. Zhao Shu, unabashedly sobbing, was already sobbing. Of course, the attempt at surveillance and assassination had failed. Could Tu Yi's single act now be the end of her? With these thoughts, the girl sank into darkness. When she woke up, the girl did not immediately understand where she was and what was happening, but she only remembered that she found herself in His Majesty's chambers, after which everything seemed unclear to her. Zhao stood in front of her joie. In a touching voice, he asked if Zhao Shu had completed her task. The poor girl was unable to answer. She was frightened and anxious. "Well," said Zhao Shu, "if you can't handle this kind of work, Daddy will have to punish you." At these words, Zhao Shu froze in horror, expecting the inevitable outburst of his teacher's anger. "No!" Zhao Shu screamed in despair, suddenly waking up. Was it all just a dream? Zhao Shu, lounging in bed nearby, turned to the girl and asked what had happened. If she'd had a nightmare, she timidly asked if the emperor would kill her. Tu Yi got out of bed and stretched. He said it was just a game. He'd save her life, pretend he knew nothing, and ask Zhao Shu to deliver a message. He thought to himself that this would only make the game more interesting. At this moment, Tu Yi was about to sign his first edict as emperor and armed himself with a brush, ink, and parchment. Tu Yi studied the parchment intently, his brush clutched tightly in his hand. Zhao Shu looked at him, and the expression on the young emperor's face frightened her. Does he really want to take action against my father again? Zhao Shu suddenly realized. I felt both excited and anxious, worried about my family and the future. Tu Yi puffed over the parchment and cursed quietly. Writing with a brush turned out to be an incredibly difficult task. Unfortunately, it was not taught in his home country. Wow, he finally breathed out in relief, and Zhao Shu wondered if he had really finished the parchment so quickly. Tu Yi turned to Zhao Shu and, putting on his friendliest expression, asked if he could write something for him. The guy came up to the girl from behind and hugged her by the shoulders. She just didn't understand why he suddenly changed so much and became completely different. She looked up at Tu Yi and timidly asked what decree the young emperor was going to issue. Tu Yi replied that the decree stipulated that all descendants of the Tu clan would be stripped of their surname and converted into commoners. Zhao Shu stood in amazement. She couldn't understand why the young emperor would decide to get rid of all his family members. The girl did not stop trying to unravel His Majesty's mysterious plans and asked why he decided to issue such a decree. Weakening the Tu family's influence is the best way to reduce my points, Zhao Shu replied. And by making the Tu family's descendants commoners, not only will I reduce my points, but I'll also look like a complete fool in the eyes of others. Yes, I'm simply a genius among the most stupid and unjust rulers. Tu Yi reveled in his cunning, but Zhao Shu seemed to understand nothing. Zhao Shu was puzzled and asked what she said, after which the girl became embarrassed and began to apologize. Tu Yi added that he does all this to increase the difficulty of the game, to add new aspects and conditions to it. The young man ironically remarked that, thanks to his decree, he would not only be left without family support, but would also acquire a bad reputation. Taking the girl's chin almost tenderly, he ordered her to go and tell Zhao Zhuo this wonderful news, expressing the hope that he would be very happy. Tu Yi hugged the girl's neck and whispered to her that all this information was a gift. She said with surprise that she had not received any gifts since childhood. Don't let me down, Tu Yi asked tenderly, and only one thought was spinning in Zhao Shu's mind. She knew that the young emperor was lying to her, but why did she feel so happy, especially in those moments when he was so gentle like now, holding her chin? So, Zhao Shu went to the family estate to fulfill the emperor's request, hoping to do it with due dignity, precision, and responsibility. Zhao Shu walked up the steps and knocked on the door. Zhao opened it himself and asked in a displeased tone why she had come. The minister reluctantly let her in and, folding his hands in anticipation, hastened to say that she had brought important information. Zhao Shu began to speak and said that His Majesty had issued an edict stripping the Tu royal family of all titles and privileges. Zhao Zhuo was simply stunned by this news and, finally coming to his senses, burst into a volley of curses. Prime Minister Li was also standing nearby. Although he was stunned by this news, he didn't show it, but Zhao Zhuo continued to be indignant. Could this boy really have figured everyone out, since they were about to choose a new ruler from among the descendants of the Tu family? Prime Minister Li turned to Zhao Shu and confirmed that the information was indeed very important, but asked how the girl had managed to obtain it and whether such serious statements could be trusted. Zhao Shu crossed her arms over her chest and, looking down, replied that in fact, His Majesty himself ordered the girl to draw up this decree. Zhao Zhuo turned purple with rage and, swinging his fist, hit Zhao Shu in the face with all his might, causing the girl to fall, and the minister accompanied the attack with choice insults. Towering over the girl and clenching his fists, Zhao Zhuo asked if she had revealed their secret herself. The minister looked furious and demanded an immediate answer. Rubbing her bruised cheek, Zhao Shu timidly whispered that she would never reveal the secret, but the minister continued to rage and shout, ordering Shu to stop this performance, as he guessed that the girl had fallen in love with the young emperor and turned him against the lords. Otherwise, he would not have asked her to issue this decree. Minister Li dropped Zhao's hand, asking him to calm down and trying to explain things logically. If Zhao Shu had revealed the secret, how would they have known about the decree? Clearly, Tu Yi simply wanted to quarrel with everyone and make them forget about the election of a new ruler. Zhuo, who stopped shouting, approached Zhao Shu and asked her not to blame her father and to forgive him. The girl replied that she held no grudge against him. However, Zhao noted, addressing Minister Li, now your plan to elect a new ruler is impossible, since the situation has changed dramatically. So Zhao Zhuo came up with a new plan. He would persuade the ministers and humiliate the young emperor at the very first audience, so that he would understand whose final say was his. Minister Li raised his finger and seemed to want to comment on the shortcomings of this plan, but stopped and decided it was best to say, "Let it be as Zhao Zhuo wishes." Minister Li thought to himself that Zhao Zhuo was not the kind of person to be trusted with such serious matters, so it was imperative to have a backup plan. At this time, the young emperor was finishing work on the decree. It was almost ready and was now waiting for the right moment to announce it, but Tu Yi understood that the final decision on the issue was still far away. Tu Yi wondered what other ways he could come up with to lower his score if he thought about it. The young man recalled that in history, rulers who destroyed their countries not only trusted traitors, but also completely ignored their duties, often raped women, and even collected entire harems. Thinking of women, Tu Yi suddenly had an idea. He decided to immediately create a harem of female ministers of the imperial court to raise the alarm. This way, not only will I lose a huge amount of points, but I will also gain some benefit for myself. Tu Yi admired his intelligence and ingenuity. Zhao and Li Tianyuan to be summoned immediately. He needed to report something to the ministers. Important news couldn't wait. The court's servant hastened to carry out the order, and now Tu Yi was already meeting and warmly greeting his high-ranking guests. The young ruler invited the guests to feel at home in his imperial chambers. Zhao Zhuo sat down and began his speech, inviting Tu Yi to arrange his first audience as the new emperor. The minister thought to himself that later, nothing would prevent him from consulting with his colleagues and sending the young man into retirement. After hearing Zhao's proposal, Tu Yi wondered whether he should even try, put in any effort, and organize receptions and audiences. And he noted out loud that he had ascended the throne only recently and had too little experience to conduct audiences, but he could entrust this matter to Minister Zhao. Minister Li Tianyuan guessed that the young emperor was not so simple and naive. He not only guessed that Zhao Zhuo was going to humiliate him during the audience, but also demonstrated complete trust in the ministers. Thus, Zhao's crude strategy proved inadequate, and Tu Yi decided it was time to implement his own plan to create a harem. Tu Yi suggested that the ministers postpone the discussion of the audience for the time being, as he had invited them to discuss a completely different topic. "The thing is," Tu Yi said, "I only have one concubine left now, Zhao Shu, and this is a real disgrace for the emperor, so I want to create a whole harem and fill it with the most beautiful women." The poor late emperor had not yet had time to cool down, and this young man was already thinking about such shameful things. Minister Zhao exclaimed indignantly. His colleague, Minister Li, was no less outraged. He thought they would discuss state affairs, but instead they discussed the creation of a harem, or perhaps this was another of the young emperor's clever tricks. "If you don't mind, I'd like to put this plan into action as soon as possible," Tu Yi said, mentally calculating how to quickly reboot the government's power outlets. The prime ministers stood frozen in silence. They did not know how to react to such a proposal. Their eyes reflected bewilderment and deep reflection on the possible consequences of such a step. Minister Zhao was the first to break the silence. He stated that he supported the emperor's idea of creating a harem, but saw no reason to rush. "I understand," Tu Yi exclaimed, "and indeed, there's no need to rush. Why search for concubines all over the country when you can stay in the capital?" the young man concluded. "Why are you so impatient?" Zhao muttered furiously to himself. Zhuo silently begged Li Tianyuan not to fall for the boy's crazy idea and to come up with something else. At this moment, Tu Yi smiled slyly and said that he even came up with a way that would save everyone time, and he was about to share the details of this idea. "So," Tu Yi said, "I propose that we immediately begin to replenish our harem with women from the families of the palace ministers." If this proposal had the effect of a bombshell, the ministers, leaving the emperor's chambers, did not show it, but only discussed that Tu Yi was completely indifferent to state affairs. He was only interested in the harem, and this, as is well known, is a sign of the ruler's stupidity. However, Minister Zhao chuckled. "This path of the inglorious ruler will very soon destroy the boy, which will save us a lot of effort and time." Minister Li Tianyuan was clearly tired of listening to Zhao's stupid, useless, and sometimes bloodthirsty ideas, so he yelled at him and told him to shut up. "Enough," Minister Li declared firmly. "If you don't stop underestimating him, Our path will end with the extermination of this family." Minister Zhao was taken aback by such familiarity. He was not accustomed to being ordered around, but he thought it best to remain silent. "I apologize for losing my temper," Minister Li apologized, "but His Majesty is certainly no fool, and his actions are extremely well thought out." However, Minister Zhao merely snorted. "What kind of thoughtfulness is this boy?" "Look," Minister Li began citing examples. "You wanted to humiliate him at the audience, but he immediately refused to host the reception. He immediately understood our intentions." Minister Zhao countered that their plan had been undetected and no one was supposed to know about it. This meant, Minister Li logically concluded, that Emperor Tuyi had known about this in advance. And furthermore, not only had he abandoned the idea of creating a harem, but he had actually decided to form one. All these actions, while outrageous, were interconnected and directed against us. "But what's the point?" Minister Zhao asked, to which Li Tianyuan replied that the young emperor had declined the audience because he could control state affairs without it. "Think about it," said Minister Li, "because through the women from the ministers' families, he will be able to lure everyone to his side and leave us in a stupid position." Faced with such an unenviable prospect, Minister Zhao even broke out in a cold sweat and whispered, "What should we do? The honor and pride of the people, the well-being of the country, are at stake." Minister Li threw up his hands and declared that nothing could be done now, because Tuyi was currently the emperor and he had every right to expand his harem. Tianyuan concluded, "Have no choice but to satisfy the emperor's demand in this matter, which apparently is vitally important to him." 9 days later, in a side hall of the palace, Tuyi received Minister Li, who reported that, according to the emperor's decree, all descendants of the royal family had been demoted in rank, but this news had not yet reached Prince Tu Su, as he was in a military camp far abroad. However, this news did not interest Tuyi too much. He just waved his hand and said that it did not matter now. We would return to this issue later. Instead, the young emperor asked the minister how the expansion of the harem was progressing, and it became clear that this was the only question that had aroused Tu Ye's keen interest. Li Tianyuan hesitated for a moment and replied that he had done his best, but time was short, so he apologized in advance. With these words, he cleared his throat and greeted His Majesty. Wow! Tuyi couldn't believe his eyes. Dozens of the most beautiful girls he had ever seen were gathered in the palace hall, bowing respectfully and showing their devotion to Tuyi in every possible way. The young emperor even began to drool. He still could not recover from his delight and wondered if this was heaven, if he was dreaming all of this. The girls continued to bow and squat, holding up their full skirts, and they looked obsequiously at Tuyi, who only repeated once again that he was very pleased with them all. Tuyi approached Minister Li and asked in a conspiratorial whisper which of the girls was the most playful and relaxed. Minister Li's expression became inscrutable. He said he didn't quite understand what Tuyi meant, and wondered if the emperor had already figured it out, and if the emperor himself was angry. Why was Minister Li feigning righteousness and pretending not to understand the hints? Minister Li thought that almost all the concubines were from aristocratic families. Could it really be that only these two girls, Fan Taozhu and Zhuge, were involved? Sha became suspicious. More than 10 years ago, two wealthy and influential families, the Fan and the Zhuge, were executed for insulting the late emperor. Minister Li is personally responsible for this execution and completely thoughtlessly decided to save the lives of the two girls who were still infants at the time. For these 10 years, Minister Li secretly raised the girls, and to his surprise, they inherited their father's talents and became important pawns for him. On the eve of the two girls' introduction to Tu Ye's harem, Minister Li summoned them to his office and announced that Emperor Tu Qian, who had exterminated their families, was dead. The girls listened attentively to Minister Li, and he continued, "You still failed to take revenge on the old emperor. You have such an opportunity now," Li suggested, "but the risk is extremely high. The new Emperor Tu Yi is far more cunning, dangerous, and treacherous than Tu Qian, so your chances are slim." However, the girls cried out passionately that they only wanted revenge, were prepared to risk it, and even die. Thus, Li Tianyuan had no difficulty in convincing the girls to get closer to the emperor through the harem. They were driven not only by a sense of revenge, but also by Li's undeniable authority. Tui immediately took a liking to these two girls. His gaze was fixed on these rare beauties, who stood out among the other concubines with their brilliance and exquisite attire. The young emperor's close observation of the two girls did not escape the keen gaze of Minister Li, who realized that Tui had immediately noticed them. Minister Li could not know this, but with the help of the speedometer, he had already compiled a complete dossier on the girls, finding out their abilities, talents, as well as the fact that they wanted to get closer to the emperor only in order to avenge the extermination of their families. I also learned that both girls were adopted by Li Tianyuan, and both lost their families under the orders of the late emperor. As it turned out, Tui came to the conclusion that these girls were spies sent to him by Minister Li. But this is not so bad. The image of fatal beauties, thirsting for revenge for their families, fits well with the image of a stupid ruler. Well, not bad at all. Tui decided, approached the girls, and gallantly asked them to introduce themselves. The girls gave their names. One was called Azu, the other Asha. The girls looked shy and embarrassed. Asha looked the most shy. The girl's cheeks were red. She did not dare to raise her eyes to the teacher, and Tui asked what and why she was so excited. Damn it. Minister Li cursed to himself. Asha is too shy. If Tui continues to pressure her, she'll give herself away. Tui gently took Asha by the chin and hinted that there was nothing to be afraid of. He was actually a very simple person. There was no need to treat him like a deity. Tui's touches and gentle words completely confused the girl and touched her to the depths of her soul. She realized that she would not be able to resist the emperor, his charm, charisma, and charisma. Speedic informed Tui that Zhuge's hidden characteristics, Sha, were unknown and not included in the database. Under stress, touching various sensitive parts of the body, including even the chin, could cause shame and even lead to loss of consciousness. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Minister Li cursed, seeing Asha's state, and realized that she was about to reveal herself, and her entire insidious plan would collapse again. And this is what happened. A moment later, Asha fell unconscious to the floor, and Tui realized that the girl needed to regain her loyalty to calm Li's anxiety, but Asha proved to be unstable under stress, and the performance failed. Tui realized that now Li Tianyuan would be afraid that she would betray him, and he would definitely find an excuse to take her place. At this moment, Minister Li, without losing his strength, bowed down and fell on his knees, begging to be forgiven for such a mistake and for bringing an ill-mannered woman to the emperor. He was ready to send her to hell even now. No, Tui exclaimed and thought to himself. This performance must continue, all for a good purpose, and no matter how much effort it takes, he will do everything to achieve your goal. Taking Asha in his arms, the emperor said that he liked girls who melted at his touch, and Asha definitely managed to win his heart. The pardoned Minister Li was showered with gratitude, and Tui tenderly whispered in Asha's ear that he already knew who would be sleeping with him tonight. At that moment, Asha was hatching a plan to assassinate the emperor that night. Aju's gloomy and thoughtful look and decided to ask her why the girl was so unhappy or upset. Aju remained silent, and Yunosha looked at her playfully and asked if she wanted to join them tonight. Why don't you be third? The boy asked innocently. Aju blushed and seemed angry, but she had no choice. The emperor's word is law, and now the two girls and Tui retired to his luxurious imperial chambers. The girl sat on a bed covered with a silk canopy. Tui looked at them and thought that of all the beauties in his harem, these two girls, in his opinion, were the most suitable. The system showed Tui that the girls wanted to destroy the country out of revenge, which meant that he couldn't miss this opportunity because he had the same goals. After all, Tui thought, if Minister Li had secretly raised them with his own hands and then brought them into the harem, then there must be something special about them. It was a pity, Tui thought, that the system only displayed basic information and basic characteristics, and he didn't know what skills would really help him destroy the country. The girls in bed were already bored, they were uncomfortable, and Aju wondered what this guy was thinking about. Obviously, the girls thought, we will have to give ourselves completely to him, and he will humiliate us in every possible way. Nothing will stop the emperor from torturing us, because we are completely in his power, the new concubines thought doomedly. These thoughts again excited Ashu, and Tu-yi seemed to her to be a completely demonic and insidious creature. Tu-yi looks dangerous even when he's inactive. A disturbing thought haunted the girls. For some reason, the fact that he hadn't touched them yet frightened them. In his final instructions before being sent to the harem, Tianyuan said that they should not worry about their personal information. Minister Li would take care of it. Li also warned that Tu-yi was very clever, cunning, and devious, and despite his lust, he could not be fooled by beauty alone. Moreover, Li continued, Zhao Zhuo had gotten ahead of him and sent Zhao Shu to him, so she was not only their ally, but also their rival. To win Tu-ye's trust, Minister Li instructed the girls, in addition to beauty, you must also demonstrate your other qualities, skills, and values. I'm sure you know how to do this. Minister Li concluded his parting words to the future concubines. The girls' stream of memories was interrupted by Tu-ye's voice. He noticed their thoughtfulness and wondered what they were thinking so deeply about. I just asked you a question, he insisted, and I would like to get an answer to it. The emperor's patience was losing. Tu-yi repeated his question, looking into the eyes of the concubines. He wanted to know what the girls were capable of, how they could surprise and entertain him. Asha answered first, saying that she could read hieroglyphs, understood the stars and astronomy, and also knew a lot about talismans, geomancy, healing, and alchemy. Yes, the list of her talents was truly limitless. So this is the alchemist's daughter's strength, Tu-yi thought, looking closely at the girl. She's revealed a new side of herself to him. Under his watchful gaze, the girl became embarrassed and quietly added that she had forgotten to mention the art of intercourse. Tu-yi merely chuckled to himself. What kind of art of intercourse was this if a girl fainted at the mere touch of a man? Well, what can you do? Tu-yi asked Chu, who noticed to herself that the emperor was apparently not too pleased with Asha's answer. Aju was in no hurry to answer. She was immersed in memories, and her childhood in a family of merchants appeared before her eyes. As a child, Aju constantly watched how her grandfather ran his business and learned several important lessons from him. Thanks to her grandfather, she learned not only how to handle money, but also how to communicate with a wide variety of people. But what later happened to her grandfather, namely his arrest and execution, made her realize that mastering both of these skills could arouse suspicion and harm her. Therefore, Asa decided that before taking revenge on Tu-yi, she needed to protect herself, and to do this, she would have to dress up in a harmless image that would not arouse suspicion. So Azu assumed the most innocent expression and told Tu-yi that she was just a fragile girl. What should she do? The boy thought that Azu, of course, was in no hurry to reveal the truth about herself. Hesitantly adjusting her hair, the girl explained that she was born into a noble family, but her parents had died, and all she had left was the family fortune. Aju decided there was nothing better than the image of a helpless woman with a vast fortune. Wow, Tu-yi was stunned. Azu pretends to be a poor orphan with a huge fortune, almost like Batman from an alternate reality. The guy thought about it, and came to the conclusion that, be that as it may, both girls could contribute to the destruction of the country. However, out loud, he said something completely different. He asked Aya why he, the emperor, needed her family's wealth. Why don't you manage the state treasury then? Tu-yi asked, and the emperor's question left Aju speechless. Since Aju comes from a family of hereditary and famous merchants, Tu-yi reasoned, and merchants always strive for their own benefit and enrichment. The girl would cope perfectly with the task of ruining the country, emptying the treasury, and destroying the economy. Tu-yi decided that the obsession with the elixir of immortality fit perfectly with the image of a foolish ruler, and so he proposed that Ash, who came from a family of alchemists, become a state tutor and work on creating an elixir of immortality for the emperor in his spare time. Asha froze at this proposal. As if struck by lightning, not a single sound escaped her parted lips. Tu-yi had already seen in a dream how, instead of the elixir of immortality, the girl would slip him a deadly poison, and how the death of his body would fall on her, on Asha. Oh yeah, back to reality, Tuyi. I almost forgot about one important matter, the guy announced. Since you are now my mentor, he said to Asha, from now on you will wear a Taoist robe, which symbolizes your new role. Asha still couldn't recover from the shock of seeing this dress, but Tuyi was pleased. He liked this kind of cosplay, and then he decided to play it big. He was already fantasizing about how he would organize entire cosplay parties with all of his numerous concubines. He was already imagining what exquisite outfits he would come up with for them. The night had already passed into twilight, and Prime Minister Zhao would continue to remain in his office, absorbed in thoughts of state affairs. Sitting at the table in front of a sheet of parchment and clutching an ink brush in his hand, the minister carefully studied the hieroglyphs, pondering every word of the new decree. If that foolish Tuyi isn't going to issue this decree, then I'll do it instead, Zhao muttered. Besides, he added, I can use the imperial seal myself. Tu Su, Zhao thought. Even though he's skilled at commanding troops, he's too driven by loyalty. If he's ordered to cut his own throat, he'll do it without hesitation. Therefore, Zhao concluded, by eliminating Tu Su, I'll deprive Tu Yi of military support, and he'll have to obey me. Putting down his brush, Zhao called out to me, and immediately the sound of feet was heard. His faithful servant, without slowing down, hurried to his master. Zhao Exen, Minister Zhao's military servant, entered the hall, knelt down on one knee, and expressed his willingness to listen to the order, his gaze revealing loyalty and humility. Minister Zhao ordered his servant to go north to the city of Lindong and deliver his recently signed decree to Commander-in-Chief Tu Su, especially emphasizing the importance of this order. The minister ordered, you must see with your own eyes how Tu Su commits suicide and then bring me his head, and I, in turn, will present it to the emperor as a gift. Yes, the servant accepted the order and set off on his journey. The last preparations remained. It was necessary to form a detachment of messengers and equip them. I was waiting for important news as soon as possible. The bird flapped its wings and disappeared into the darkness of the night, only its silhouette flashing against the background of the full moon, the raven following its instructions with unfailing precision. At this time, Zhao Exin's servant had already set out on horseback, accompanied by a group of messengers, hurrying to deliver the imperial decree to the city of Lindong as quickly as possible. However, the messengers were being watched by a group of mysterious people in black robes and hoods who were hiding in the branches of tree among the dense foliage. Thanks to their ability to hide, they were practically invisible. The leader of the group was apparently a young girl, the left half of her face covered by a butterfly-shaped mask, and it was this girl who gave the order for the group to prepare. Let's begin, the girl commanded, and the squad, keeping their cool, jumped from the branch of a tall tree where they had previously set up an ambush. As a result of the jump, a pair of fighters lost their balance and fell straight to the ground. The girl encouraged them and ordered them to move on. The ambush was apparently set for the messengers led by Zhao Exen. They were galloping through the forest when suddenly the horse of Zhao's servant saw an obstacle in front of him. It turned out that right in the middle of the forest, a rope was stretched between the trees. The horses did not have time to slow down and fell, knocking down a group of riders. The messengers' misadventures did not end there. The same hooded men, led by Lady Xiao, jumped out of ambush and not only jumped out, but also began attacking the messengers. The attackers were agile and nimble, armed with sharp daggers, and, jumping from the trees straight onto the heads of the messengers, they struck like birds of prey, mercilessly and accurately. The attackers' intentions were clearly not the friendliest. One of them shouted that Madame Xiao had ordered that no one be left alive, and the harsh tone of his voice only confirmed the truth of his words. The military servant Zhao Exin exclaimed, "Traitors! How dare you attack the envoys?" and called on the attackers to stop and come to their senses. However, the attackers did not listen to Zhao Exin and continued to shed blood. Chaos and confusion, fear and disorder reigned all around. Screams shook the night forest. Miraculously, the surviving servant Zhao continued on his way, with the full moon illuminating his path. Suddenly, the silence was broken by footsteps. Someone crept up behind the messenger and put a cold dagger to his neck. It was Madame Xiao. Not wanting to torment the envoy with guesses about who these sudden attackers were, Lady Xiao said that they were Manhwa's guards. However, this didn't save the messenger. The blade sank into his throat, blood gushed, and the killer collected his profit. Now he hands the lady a heavy box, obviously containing the valuable cargo the messengers were carrying. The attackers opened the box. As expected, an imperial decree was hidden inside. Madame Xiao chuckled and said, "Did our brainless emperor really order Prince Su to commit suicide?" One of the bandits turned to the lady and asked if they had exceeded their authority today, and if this was a real imperial decree. It seemed that Madame Xiao was not pleased with her subordinate's doubts. She became angry and asked if he had truly forgotten the original goals of the Manhwa guards during the short period of peace. Lady Xiao reminded that just as light gives birth to darkness, so too does Qian give birth to Kun. Their guard were created to protect the late emperor. We may resort to ruthless and bloody methods, Madame Xiao reminded, but we must not forget where our loyalty truly lies. Lady Xiao explained that the late emperor had appointed Prince Su as his heir, so the Manhwa guards must now protect the prince with all their might. Now Tui not only usurped power, but also wanted to get rid of the crown prince. And with these words, Lady Xiao grabbed the decree and tore it to shreds. The guards watched as the fragments of the decree fell to the ground like petals, and Madame Xiao reminded them that Tui was an enemy they must destroy. The deforestation was a reminder of the bloody massacre that had taken place here, and Mrs. Xiao ordered soldiers to clear the area and destroy all traces of the crime so that no one would know what had happened here. Madame Xiao reasoned like this. Prince Su is far to the north, and the journey to the capital and back would take at least 4 days. This meant, Madame Xiao decided, that for at least 4 days, Yi should not suspect anything. And then Mrs. Xiao concluded, "I will kill Yi with my own hands." She shouted the last words with particular pleasure. Apparently, she really liked this idea. At that very moment, somewhere far, far away from the forest and Mrs. Xiao, Lu Yi sneezed loudly. He had been sitting playing cards with Azu and Asha and asked the girls which of them was thinking about him. 5 days passed, and Minister Zhao began to worry. He sat in his chambers, pondering, trying to unravel the mystery of the envoy's deathly silence. Although he couldn't even sit still due to excitement, he paced back and forth in the room, wondering where this Zhao Xan had gone. There had been no news from this foolish messenger for 5 days. While Zhao was in disarray, Minister Li Tianyuan entered his chambers. He immediately noticed Zhao's uneasiness and asked if he was waiting for someone. Judging by Zhao's appearance, he was waiting for someone, but he certainly wasn't waiting for Minister Li. Minister Zhao was clearly suspicious of Minister Li's late arrival and asked him what he was doing there and what his intentions were. Li Tianyuan raised his index finger and solemnly announced that he came with one good news and one bad news. Well then, let's start with the bad news, Minister Zhao was suggested and prepared to listen, focusing on the upcoming news. Your plan, shouted Minister Li, the one with the forged imperial decree, has failed. Minister Zhao was simply stunned by this news. You, Minister Zhao muttered, unable to find the right words. What are you even talking about? At that moment, he walked up to Li Tianyuan and almost choked him with anger. Minister Li tried to calm his noisy colleague and told him that they were actually on the same side, so there was no need to hide and pretend. Li Tianyuan continued his story, saying that 5 days ago, Zhao Xian was killed in the suburbs, and he was killed by the leader of the Manhwa guard, Lady Xiao. Zhao tried to recall everything he knew about the guards. It occurred to him that they were the late emperor's unit. But why would they need to kill the messengers? Minister Zhao tensed up, but didn't want to think about it anymore and demanded that Li Tianyuan move on to the good news. After a pause, Li Tianyuan admitted that although Xiao had killed Zhao Xian, she had mistakenly believed that the decree had been issued by Yi himself, and now her next target was Yi himself. Excellent, excellent. I'm so happy. Minister Zhao muttered joyfully. He even began to rub his palms impatiently, but then a thought occurred to him, and he stopped like a deflated balloon. This unexpected guess seriously frightened Zhao, and he hastened to share his suspicions with Li, asking how he knew such secret information, since the Manhwa guards acted independently. But Minister Li evasively replied that he had his own methods. This time, Li Tianyuan concluded, "We were very lucky, as they say. There's a glimmer of hope in every cloud." The minister sighed with relief. "We will take advantage of the situation and even out the balance of power," promised Minister Li Tianyuan, standing thoughtfully by the window, as if gazing into the distant horizons of dim prospects. "Today," Minister Li continued, "His Majesty is hosting a party at the palace with his harem, which will be attended by many people, including dignitaries and ladies of the court. Therefore," Minister Li reminded, "this evening Xiao has a great opportunity to physically eliminate Tu Yi, because at a noisy celebration it is easy to sow chaos and disorder." Minister Li admitted that he had made significant efforts to weaken the security guard's vigilance, using all his connections, influence, and resources to do so. The point was, Li Tianyuan reasoned, that Xiao was now firmly tied to Tu Su. So whether she killed the emperor or not, Tu Su's status as a regicide would forever remain. And then, Minister Li concluded, having lost his reputation as a righteous man, Tu Su, even with his army, would no longer be so terrible. Minister Zhao seemed to like Li's plan, praising it and saying that this way they could kill two birds with one stone, get rid of Tu Yi and discredit Tu Su's reputation. Li Tianyuan asked Minister Zhao to take into account that he had described the ideal scenario, but in reality everything would depend on fate, so it was necessary to be flexible and be prepared for any developments. Minister Zhao was concerned about what Li was saying. The plan was perfect, so what could be the problem? But Li didn't waste time explaining, saying he'd simply come to deliver the news, and now it was time for him to leave. After leaving Minister Zhao's quarters and walking down the stairs, Minister Li thought that the only one who could stop this plan was the young Emperor Tu Yi. Minister Li also made sure that Azu and Ashi, who hated the Tu family with all their hearts, also had the opportunity to attack His Majesty tonight. Li Tianyuan wondered if the girls, despite their intelligence and caution, would be able to resist Tu Ye's calculations. A cosplay party led by Tu Yi was held at the Qinyuan Imperial Palace. The girls, dressed in a wide variety of stunning outfits, exchanged compliments and wondered which of them the emperor would invite to his chambers today. The girls exchanged not only compliments, but also barbs, because all the concubines of the harem were of aristocratic origin, so no one wanted to give in the struggle for the favor of His Majesty. Xiao, the head of the Manhwa guards, was dressed in exquisite attire, with a veil covering part of her face. As she entered, she thought of how shameless and debauched Tu Yi was, judging by the attire of the ladies present. Zhao's killer instinct haunted her. Looking at the girls, she wondered why they were so driven by the desire to kill, since they clearly had never heard of martial arts. So, after looking around this whole cosplay party, Xiao came to the conclusion that it was a real horror. The girls noticed Xiao, whose outfit clearly didn't match the evening's theme, and began to talk about her, wondering if she had finally become a maid. They didn't realize that Xiao was listening. One of the girls remarked that Zhao's idea about the costume was good, but only power and influence were important here, and an idea alone was not enough, and her friend burst out laughing. Xiao was trying to calm down and focus on her goal, when suddenly a courtier announced His Majesty's arrival. And so the young emperor, dressed only in shorts and a robe casually thrown over his shoulders, entered the hall and greeted the assembled guests, and Xiao realized that the time had come. Tu Yi blew kisses left and right, confessed his love to every beauty, and watched with pleasure as the system message notified him that his dissolute and depraved lifestyle, as well as gluttony, had reduced his total state points by 200. The girls were delighted with Tu Ye's appearance, competed with each other in declaring their love, shouted that they wanted to have children with him, and were generally in a state of euphoria. Then Tu Ye's gaze fell on a clearly unfamiliar girl, one he'd never seen before. The stranger piqued his interest, and the speedster immediately provided him with a detailed profile of Xiao, and it was her, including information about how she intended to kill him. Xiao also noticed Tu Ye's gaze. She interpreted it in her own way and wondered if he had already noticed her and guessed everything. At that moment, fearing premature exposure, the girl pulled out a dagger and rushed at Tu Ye, shouting, "Die, tyrant!" Xiao Tuyi rushed towards him, but he only scratched the back of his head in bewilderment, astonished by such strange and overt aggression. Asha and Azu also watched this scene, and the words about the tyrant seemed terribly unfair and treacherous to them. Is this really the point of the general exam? The girls thought, remembering Tu Ye's words the day before the party. Let's go back 5 days. Tu Ye gathered all his concubines in his chambers and announced that he would soon be throwing a cosplay theme party there. Asha and Azu misinterpreted the word cosplay and thought they were about to take some kind of general exam. However, Tu Ye explained that cosplay was a role-playing game in which the girls had to prepare beautiful costumes with different themes, and the concubines were only required to play their roles and entertain him. Hearing these words from the emperor, Asha and Azu exchanged glances, while Tu Ye continued to explain that the essence of the general examination was to fulfill one's role as diligently as possible. So when the girls saw Yi Xiao rushing towards Tu with a dagger in his hand, they thought it was part of the general examination. Aju decided that this imposter had decided to play the role of a hired killer, and as everyone knows, such a dangerous role would easily attract a man's attention. So the girl decided to prevent her rival from achieving her goal at all costs and rushed toward her. Aju screamed that she would stop the killer for His Majesty's sake. Of course, it was no trouble for Xiao to grab and push away Azu, who was clearly inferior to him in fighting skills. The head of Kunwai thought that this girl was crazy if she thought she could stop her, and Xiao clearly doubted Azu's competence. The other concubines also began to suspect that perhaps this was the essence of the role-playing game, and now this upstart would outplay everyone. We will not let this girl outshine us all. With this exclamation, the concubines rushed en masse to Xiao, demonstrating amazing unity, determination, and solidarity in the face of a common threat. The concubines surrounded Xiao in a tight circle and, competing with each other, shouted that she would not be able to attract the emperor's attention with such vile methods, that the newcomer apparently did not know the rules, and that there was a hierarchy in the harem, and each concubine knew her place. Zhao's plans were carried out at any cost, and Tu Yi himself watched this action with silent surprise. Xiao was amazed by the concubine's devotion. She was in amazement. A cruel and dissolute scoundrel appeared before them, and they were ready to risk their lives for him. What was so special about him? Since this is your choice, I will show you no mercy, Xiao said, swinging her dagger at one of the concubines who was protecting the emperor. Oh no, Tu Yi exclaimed. The harem plays a vital role in creating the image of a foolish ruler and achieving my ultimate goal, the destruction of the country. Under no circumstances must the concubines be allowed to suffer. Stop, don't touch them. Emperor, Xiao tried to stop her. She froze for a moment, wondering why he, instead of saving his own skin, had decided to stop her, even though it was a brave but foolish act. The concubines admired Tu Ye's bravery in stopping the assassin for them, and Xiao asked if Tu Ye was willing to die for them, but she still didn't mind killing a few girls while she waited for his answer. Tu Ye realized that now was not the time to die, because if he did, his main goal would be thwarted and all his efforts would be in vain. Tu Ye turned to Xiao and said that his time had not yet come. She replied that this meant nothing, that it was just beautiful words with no real meaning. However, as Tu Ye suggested, I am willing to hand over the throne to Tu Su, so that's why you came to kill me. Isn't that right, Xiao? Tu Ye asked. Hearing the young emperor address her by name and reveal her plans, Xiao was shocked. Could this be a trap? Did Tu Ye know everything about her and her goals? Xiao was incredibly puzzled, looked closely at Tu Ye's face, and asked what he really wanted. Tu Ye raised his hand dramatically and solemnly announced that it was time to show his cards. What am I trying to achieve? Tu Ye asked. I'm nothing but a fool and a slacker, he replied. Do I really deserve such a magnificent harem? I have no ability to govern a country. I have no desire to be emperor. Wouldn't it be better, Tuyi asked, to pass the throne to a more worthy person? The concubines, dressed in luxurious clothes, looked at Tuyi with all their eyes, not believing that their beloved emperor was saying such strange things. Suddenly, a system notification flashed before Tuyi's eyes, informing him that his actions had triggered a random event, resumption of military rebellion at Shinbridge. The essence of this event was that a threat existed that could force Tuyi to voluntarily cede the throne. Tuyi was jubilant. He had made the right choice, because with his desire to save the harem, he had provoked an event that would lead to the destruction of the country, which meant that his balance would be completely reset. Xiao looked at Tuyi's face with disbelief. She couldn't believe that there were people in the world who were willing to voluntarily give up power, and she came to the conclusion that the emperor was still trying to deceive her. However, Xiao cared little whether the emperor was telling the truth or not. She still intended to kill him and help Tu Su ascend the throne. Does Xiao still want to kill me? Tuyi thought. In that case, we need to turn up the chatterbox to full power. By killing me, Tuyi began his heartfelt speech. You will only make Tu Su a regicide and condemn him to a terrible reputation for the rest of his days, and I, said Tuyi, cannot allow such a fate for my dear brother. Tuyi's words suddenly took her back to her own memories, to the time when the late emperor was still alive. Xiao remembered kneeling and listening to the wise emperor. At the end of his years, he turned to Xiao and asked if he had been a good emperor, since he had founded the Qian dynasty and stopped the war in the north. Bowing her head respectfully, Xiao replied that His Majesty's determination and strategic talent would make him famous for centuries to come. The old emperor countered that his abilities were only suitable for turbulent times, and that the next ruler of the Qian dynasty would require completely different qualities. Xiao retorted fiercely, "The Qian dynasty will always need a ruler like you, Your Majesty." "My time is coming to an end," the emperor said, but there was nothing tragic about it. As soon as he said these words, tears appeared in Zhao's eyes. The old emperor continued his farewell words, saying that he was counting on his successor, even if he conceded in some things, even if he showed complete laziness. The main thing was that the successor was tolerant and did not pursue immediate gain. At that moment, Xiao sincerely believed that His Highness Tu Su would be the successor. However, now Xiao began to doubt, because all these qualities described by the late emperor, namely laziness, tolerance, indifference, were much more suitable for Tuyi. Xiao seemed frightened by her own train of thought, thinking, "No, how can one take Tuyi's words seriously?" After all, this was Prince Tu Su, the late emperor's eldest son and the rightful heir to the throne, and the girl had decided to seize Tuyi and take him to Tu Su, letting the prince make his own decision. In that case, Xiao ordered, "You will go with me north to the city of Lindong, and there you will personally hand over the throne to His Highness Tu Su." Tuyi was delighted with this prospect, because it meant that all he had to do was hand over the throne to the prince, and then he would finally be free and able to return home. "Don't rush." Tuyi's thoughts were interrupted by someone's voice. It was Asha, and she asked if she had prepared the spell in vain. Apparently, Tuyi had already forgotten that Asha was a hereditary alchemist, and, without wasting any time, began to act as an advisor. She guessed that he had a witch and reproached herself for her naivety. She suspected that everything Tuyi had told her about the transfer of the throne was a lie. Xiao tightly clutched the dagger in her hand and thought that Tuyi was not as stupid as she had previously thought. Firstly, he knew how to manipulate people. In fact, at this moment, Tuyi was confused. He didn't understand what was going on and was completely bewildered. Suddenly, someone placed a hand on Tuyi's shoulder and squeezed it reassuringly. It was Asha, and she told Tuyi not to worry because Asha was a very powerful sorceress. "This killer," Azu said, "is no match for Asha. Asha is capable of protecting you. Rely on her," Azu advised. Tuyi was inwardly indignant. He hadn't asked for protection at all. There was no need for it. Aju, on the contrary, was proud of herself and glad she had asked for it. The night before Li Tianyuan sent Azu and Asha to the harem, They had another conversation. During this meeting, the minister discussed in detail the plans and role of the girls in the upcoming operation. You will soon find yourself in the harem, Minister Lee instructed the girls, and become close to Tu-yi. Do you know what your main mission is? Lee asked, emphasizing the importance of the task. Yes, Aju cried passionately. We will find a way to kill him to avenge our families. Her voice was filled with determination and fearlessness. Lee merely laughed at the girl's response and asked if they really thought they could take revenge on the late emperor simply by killing Tu-yi. No, Lee continued, your main mission is to destroy the Qian dynasty, founded by Emperor Qianjun. Therefore, Prime Minister Li Tianyuan concluded that Tu-yi's assassination would be postponed until an appropriate moment. The girls looked at Li in surprise, and he continued the conversation. At first, everyone considered Tu-yi the most stupid and worthless prince. Minister Li stated that by taking advantage of Tu-su's absence, he helped Tu-yi ascend the throne and thus played an important role in the political struggle. Therefore, as Aju suggested, by becoming the young emperor's concubines, we will lead the Qian dynasty to decline. You really catch on. Li Tianyuan praised the girl's intelligence, noting her understanding of complex political intrigues. However, as you can guess, Li said, this was my original plan, but after Tu-yi's accession to the throne, it seems to have changed. What we previously thought was stupidity turned out to be a clever disguise, Minister Li concluded, and Tu-yi has become much more unpredictable. So don't rush to kill him, Minister Li said. You'll have to observe him to find his weak points. Aju looked at Li and realized she'd never seen that expression on his face before. Is he scared or excited? The girl wondered. His excitement was contagious. She felt his tension radiating through her, sending a wave of mixed emotions and nervousness through her. Azu, Mr. Li said to the girl, you are very smart and adapt well to your surroundings. Your insight and cunning will help you successfully cope with even the most difficult situations. And you, he turned to Asha, even though you are simple-minded, you are strong in witchcraft and very skilled. Therefore, he admonished the girl, Li, you must remember only one thing. Tu-yi must not meet Tu-su under any circumstances. Li Tianyuan finally said his final parting words to the girls, to which they replied that they understood everything. Thus, the girls now realized that Mr. Li was indeed not mistaken. Tu-yi's stupidity was just a disguise, carefully thought out and skillfully executed to hide his true intentions and abilities. A terrible thought flashed through his mind. Tu-yi had arranged this strange banquet using disguises only to make contact with Kunwai's guards and then team up with Tu-su against Lord Li. The girls had long been engrossed in the fight, their movements becoming increasingly frantic and chaotic, and Tu-yi decided to stop this madness and loudly call for them to calm down. His voice cut through the din of battle, causing everyone to freeze and pay attention to him. The girl came to her senses, realizing that her emotions had gotten the better of her. I think I got carried away and almost got caught, she thought. Tu-yi, looking at the fighting girls, suddenly remembered that Asha and Azu were actually allies of Li Tianyuan and were together weaving insidious plans against him, the emperor. Li Tianyuan wanted to use him as a puppet, and these girls would under no circumstances allow the throne to be handed over to Prince Tu-su, which meant Tu-yi decided that he needed to take control of Asha and begin the restoration of the military rebellion. Tu-yi was thinking about how to stop Asha when he suddenly remembered her vulnerability, namely that when she was stressed, touching various parts of her body could cause her to lose consciousness. The guy came up to the girl from behind, hugged her around the waist, and put his hand on her neck. She immediately froze, and the rhythm of her breathing changed. Tu-yi hugged Asha gently but firmly and quietly said that as an emperor, he could let his favorite concubine fight for him. These words turned the girl's heart into sweet syrup. She almost lost consciousness from the feelings that overwhelmed her. Come on, take advantage of this opportunity and grab me. Tu-yi Xiao shouted, and at that moment, Asha was already lying limply in his arms. Puzzled, Xiao was about to swing her blade, but suddenly stopped and wondered if this was another of Tu-yi's devious plans. Come on, Stop procrastinating, Tu-yi said angrily. His voice was thick with desperation and anger. He knew that by the time the guard arrived, it would be too late to act, and all their efforts would be in vain. Time was running out, and every minute of delay brought his plans closer to ruin. Meanwhile, Xiao decided to first capture the emperor and then consider further action. Her decisiveness and swiftness impressed Tu-yi, and he liked her line of thought. With all her strength and speed, Xiao attacked Tu-yi, who was still holding Asha in his arms. The girl was unconscious. Suddenly, Asha, still unconscious, seemed to fly into the air with her eyes closed. It turned out that Usha possessed hidden second-level abilities that manifested when she lost consciousness from a man's touch. The room was shrouded in a thick purple fog. It seemed that Asha herself was unaware of her hidden abilities. Xiao and Tu-yi froze in amazement. In the conditions where she had superpowers, she could become enraged if any other woman other than Aju came into contact with this man. Xiao, it seemed, had never encountered anything like this before, looked at Asha in surprise, and then, opening her eyes, demanded in an unusual voice that she take her hands off her man. Asha was unlike her former self. Her eyes glowed with a mysterious emerald light, and a ghostly purple smoke swirled around her. In its halo, she approached Xiao. Xiao thrust her dagger forward, showing that she was ready to fight to the end, but Asha did not stop. She, unarmed, folded her hands in front of her in a prayer gesture. Flight, the true fire of Samadhi, was Asha's charm, and indeed, as soon as she folded her hands, flames burst forth around her. A fiery funnel rose up right above Asha. She ordered it to fly up and was about to bring it down on Xiao. Realizing the danger looming over her, Xiao remained motionless and tense, her pupils literally turning into dots. But Tu-yi was not at all delighted with his patron concubine. He understood that if Asha killed Xiao, the event would not happen, and the points would not be deducted. Get down quickly, Tu-yi Xiao ordered, and rushed to save the girl from Asha's wrath. But it seemed it was too late. A fiery vortex swirled around Asha's hand, and she directed it straight at her opponent. From the outside, it looked as if a rain of fire had fallen upon the imperial palace. So strong and powerful was Asha's anger. But Tu-yi still turned out to be clever and lucky. He managed to push Xiao away from the hot pipe and, knocking the girl off her feet, somehow miraculously pressed his lips to hers. It seemed that none of the three girls had expected this development, but Xiao was especially shocked. Tu-ye's accidental kiss had literally sent her into a rage. The flames continued to rage around, their tongues licking the walls and ceiling, illuminating the room with a bright light. Everything was shrouded in thick smoke, which made breathing difficult and blinding the eyes. Confusion and disorder reigned. Ashan stood a little to the side and watched, covering her mouth in amazement. A fog swirled before her eyes, and none of the combatants were visible. Suddenly, Ashan could make out a silhouette from the smoke. It turned out that it was Tu-yi. He was unharmed, at least at first glance. He was standing in the middle of the room and looking around. The Chun Bridge Rebellion, and also the trigger for the next event. Wang of Qin hides behind a pillar. In the history of Tu-ye's homeworld, the assassin Jin Ku was supposed to kill Wang of Qin, Yingzheng, but Yingzheng escaped death by cleverly hiding behind a pillar, and then the court physician stopped the assassin by throwing a bag of medicine at him. Event conditions. Wang from the Qin kingdom is hiding behind a column, and the first condition is that there is an assassin in the main hall of the palace. The second condition. During the attempted murder, a person with medical skills is present and takes action against the killer. The system informs Tu-yi that the event will be considered complete if he defeats the killer, after which he will receive an additional 1,000 points. The system congratulated Tu-yi on his point balance reaching 1,400, but Tu-yi was furious. What kind of new event is this? Tu-yi suddenly realized that after the last system update, not only had his points not been deducted, but they had even been replenished, meaning that his return home was delayed again. The cry of despair that Tu-yi let out was so loud and piercing that it was probably heard not only by the residents of the entire capital, but also by those living in its remote outskirts. Aju watched what had become of the cosplay party and wondered how Tu-yi had managed to survive, as both masters were already unconscious after the fight. Aju recalled Mr. Lee's last instructions again, and now she began to understand why he had that expression on his face when they talked about Tu-yi. Xiao was lying unconscious on the floor, seemingly almost lifeless, when she suddenly slowly opened her eyes and looked around with a blurry gaze. Tu-yi immediately noticed that the girl had woken up, quickly walked up to her, and, without hiding his anxiety, looked in her face, carefully peering in her eyes, as if trying to catch the slightest sign of her condition and understand how serious it was. Xiao was too weak to get up. She only looked around and couldn't figure out where she was. Zhao's confusion prompted Tu-yi to ask the girl to guess where she was and, without waiting for her answer, to shout that she was in his imperial chambers. Just then, Xiao noticed that her hands were tightly bound with steel shackles. She cast a furious glance at Tu and shouted, "Shameless tyrant!" Xiao guessed something terrible and, barely holding back her tears, screamed, imagining what Tu-yi was going to do to her when he took her into his arms. Tu-yi pointed his finger straight at Zhao's face and said that if it weren't for him, she would have died at the hands of Li Tianyuan, thereby emphasizing his own role in saving her life. This man described how it all happened. According to him, almost immediately after the assassination attempt, the head of the palace guard, Li Tianyuan, led the guards into the main hall. After knocking down the door to the hall, where the costume party was taking place, Li Tianyuan directed the guards towards Xiao and ordered them to detain the killer. Later, Li Tianyuan knelt and begged Tu-yi for forgiveness, sobbing and declaring that he deserved to die because his mistake had nearly led to His Majesty's death. Tu-yi merely brushed off his apologies and admitted that he had escaped with only a slight fright. Looking down at the floor, Li Tianyuan promised Tu-yi that the killer would definitely be apprehended, and then he would conduct an investigation to find out who organized the assassination attempt. Tu-yi realized that in this case his next plan would fail again and shouted, "No, don't arrest the murderer." After Tianyuan's questioning look, Tu-yi admitted that he liked the assassin's appearance and invited her to become part of his harem and live in his quarters. "But, Your Majesty," Li Tianyuan urged, "think about yourself and your safety, because this assassin is very dangerous and could pose a threat not only to you, but to your entire dynasty." Tu-yi, putting on an innocent expression, said that he was excited by the feeling of danger, and, moreover, he was clearly going to add something to Tu-yi's words. Besides, Tu-yi continued, "Do you, Minister Li, really think that I am incapable of dealing with an unarmed woman in shackles?" Li Tianyuan hastened to justify himself, and Tu-yi at the same moment picked up the lifeless Xiao in his arms and ordered Azu to take care of Asha, who had not yet recovered from the fight. Tu-yi headed to his quarters and finally said that Sister Zhao would go with him and everyone else was free to go. So Xiao ended up in the emperor's chambers, and the emperor himself was at that time pondering what to do with the murderer next, since the attempt to organize a military rebellion had failed. Tu-yi realized that the assassin was still of great value and decided that she should be sent to Tu-su to continue her great work of destroying the country. Tu-yi approached Xiao with a withering gaze. She squealed and demanded that she not come close to her, do anything, even if it killed her, just not come closer. Wanting to distract Tu-yi, Xiao shouted that he had better kill her, because it was she who had killed the messenger whom the emperor had entrusted to deliver the decree to Prince Tu-su. Tu-yi, wanted the prince to commit suicide. "But sooner or later, His Highness Prince Tu-su will kill you," Xiao threatened, and Tu-yi did not understand what kind of decree this was, because he did not sign anything, much less send it with a messenger. "An edict in favor of Tu-su?" Tu-yi asked again. "I know nothing about this." Xiao responded by shouting and ordering him to stop pretending. "His Highness Tu-su is the late emperor's true heir, and you, Tu-yi, cannot sit peacefully on the throne while he lives." Zhao Shu stood right in the chamber and overheard this entire conversation. She knew His Majesty had nothing to do with this decree, as it had been issued in secret by her adoptive father, Zhao Zhua. Tu-yi looked at Zhao and thought that, Judging by her behavior, the concubine knew everything, and he guessed that Zhao Zhuo had forged the order, apparently so fearless as to do such a thing behind the emperor's back. But Tui decided to leave things as they were, allow Tu Su to hate him. Under Xiao Tuye's intense and attentive gaze, he decided to put on a show and pretend to have forgotten, pretending to slap his forehead and saying that he remembered how he issued this decree. Zhao Shu was puzzled by Tuye's confession. She didn't understand why he lied when she knew the truth about what was happening, and she was confused about how Tuyi was going to explain his actions and what he was ultimately hoping for. Finally, Tuyi said, and, as if trying on a bladed weapon, he approached the podium. He drew his katana from its sheath and said, "The prince holds in his hands the enormous military force his father was supposed to leave him." Watching Tuye's performance in front of the girls, she wondered why His Majesty decided to take all the blame on himself. Looking at the sparkling sharp katana, Tuyi said that he thought about it and decided that killing the prince with such a decree would be too boring. Pretending to swing his katana at Xiao, Tuyi said that he would probably choose a slow game strategy. However, Xiao was not accustomed to Tuye's playful mood and decided that he took her attacks completely seriously, regarding his words and gestures as a threat and not as a joke or a game. The girl cowered and closed her eyes, waiting for the fatal blow that was about to take her life. Her heart was pounding wildly. However, no blow followed, and Xiao dared to open her eyes and ask if the emperor really intended to kill her. Tuyi responded that since she had killed the messenger, she would issue a new decree to Prince Tu Su. Standing thoughtfully at the stand with cold weapons, Tuyi remembered how his father told him that Tu Su was born for war, and in order for him to gain experience before ascending the throne, he appointed him as the prince of the northern lands and commander-in-chief of the northern army. So Tu Su only knows brute force, and there is nothing to fear from him. And I, Tuyi, with a dramatic pause, today give the order not only to remove him from the position of commander-in-chief, but also to strip him of his Tu surname. From now on, he is a commoner. Xiao was simply stunned by such statements, and Tuyi continued and said that if Prince Tu Su was not satisfied with the emperor's decision, then he should raise a rebellion and take everything back by force, and asked that this be conveyed word for word. Tuyi also asked her to tell the prince that she would be waiting for him in Xinjing. Tuyi privately thought he was playing the role of a foolish tyrant, jealous of his brother and willing to die for provocation, which, upon reflection, didn't sound very convincing. As soon as the young man finished his speech, a system notification appeared before his eyes, informing him that his actions had triggered a two-stage event that was devastating the country, and this event was called War of Overcoming Difficulties. Tuyi wondered how this one was different from the previous ones. So, the conditions for activation have been met. There is contact with the army in the north of the capital, and there is an imperial decree calling for the prince's removal from power. In the history of Tuye's homeworld, there was a similar story involving an attempted rebellion by the prince. The system declared that if the prince revolted as a result, the first stage of the event would be considered complete, and 2,000 points would be deducted from the balance. And if the prince led his troops to the capital as a result, the second stage of the event would be considered complete, and 5,000 points would be deducted from the balance. Using simple math, Tuyi calculated that if both stages of the event were completed, his points would become negative. Seeing such a wonderful prospect, Tuyi burst into demonic laughter. He couldn't stop laughing, and Xiao thought he had completely gone crazy. But that was good, Xiao decided, because if the emperor went mad, His Highness Tu Su would have a chance to reclaim the throne, just as she wanted. Tuyi sent Xiao away with an edict. Zhao Shu watched the emperor bid her farewell and wondered what the young man was trying to achieve by letting the murderer go, taking the blame for Zhao Zhuo even deliberately trying to anger Tu Su. Suddenly, an idea occurred to him. He couldn't rely on chance alone, otherwise the system would constantly award him points for failure. It seemed that traitors would have to be used in every possible way to carry out his plan to destroy the country. Tuyi glanced back and saw Zhao Shu standing quietly behind him. He suddenly remembered that the woman standing behind her was Zhao Shu, who had once offered him an audience. It seemed the time had come to take advantage of that offer. Zhao Shu, The young emperor called out to the concubine, who turned to him with a questioning look. As of lately, Tu admitted, and I've become completely cold toward you. Zhao Shu responded by saying that His Majesty's words frightened her. Tu asked the girl not to be afraid and reminded her how he had asked her to convey something to Zhao Zhua, and now he had a new request. He wanted Zhao Shu to convey the news to his stepfather that the emperor was going to an audience, and for the minister to make good preparations. Having expressed his request, the young emperor tenderly hugged Zhao Shu by the shoulders. She literally melted and could not refuse her master. Finally, when the date of the audience was set, the gentlemen, ministers, and representatives of the upper classes gathered in the ceremonial hall of the imperial palace. The Zhua banquet hall. The nobles greeted him and bowed to meet the important gentleman, but he only waved away the formalities, and a satisfied smile appeared on Zhao's face. The minister's subordinates bowed their heads respectfully, but his expression suddenly turned displeased. Noticing Li Tianyuan's absence, he inquired about the reason for his absence. Zhao Zhua was informed that Minister Li had asked him to say that he was not feeling well, and Zhao Zhua was already starting to seethe with indignation. It seemed that Mr. Li had underestimated his plan. Good, Zhao agreed. Zhua, Mr. Li's health is more important than his absence today, the minister thought to himself. Today he will definitely strengthen his authority among the officials, and later he will settle the score with Tu. Zhao had no time to finish his treacherous thoughts when the herald announced the arrival of His Majesty the Emperor. The other heralds took up the announcement in a different tone, and Minister Zhao Zhua's face darkened noticeably. And so His Majesty the Emperor entered through the doors opened by the servants. Today he was dressed in a snow-white robe adorned with gold frills, and Zhao Shu walked beside him. The courtiers noticed the girl and began to whisper, asking why the emperor had brought his concubine to the audience. It was completely unceremonious. Tu, hearing these rumors behind his back, laughed at the courtiers. Well, you are not destined to have just one concubine. What do you think of this? The young emperor asked playfully. What he saw caused the courtiers to widen their eyes and gape in surprise. It seemed as if Tu had brought almost his entire harem to the audience. Girls in frivolous outfits entered the banquet hall one after another, and the emperor truly knew how to surprise.